One. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. This is Strange Mosaic. And sometimes, what I've noticed a lot since I started doing media about 4 or 5 years ago is the amount of media I actually consume has drastically decreased. Whereas I used to listen to 25 hours of podcasts a day and know what everybody was talking about all the time. Now, if I get through one whole podcast over the course of a week, then I'm doing pretty good. And so, unfortunately, what that does is sometimes it makes it difficult to bring new people into the mix of the shows and the topics you talk about, because when you do this, you know how much hard work this is. And so you don't want to offend somebody by not being familiar with your work when you bring them on their work, when you bring on the show. Because we've all listened to those podcasts where someone's like interviewing someone about their work or their book, and they have no idea what this person actually does. And we never want to be that. But what that also does is keep us from meeting new people and opening up new conversations and whatnot. And so I've decided I'm not going to do that anymore, but I'm going to be creative about the way that I kind of go about deciding who I want to chat with and then maybe pursue their work further. And that is, if I pop in on something and someone's saying something that's interesting to me and they feel like they have nice resonance for me, I'm just going to ask for an introductory kind of conversation, and we're going to do it here for you. So that's what's happening today. And Lindsey Scharmyn from Rogue Ways is here. So welcome. And I'm glad to be to doing this with you like this. And we're just going to kind of get to know each other here a bit on the air and see where we go.
Hey, that's exactly how I roll. So I think it's perfect. And I'm with you. You know, when you're a content creator yourself, it's really hard to find any time to do anything else but what you're doing. And so I also have this huge dearth of listening to anything, any content at all. And it's sad because I love so much content. So many people are such great creators and have so much information. And I do wish I had the time, but I don't commute anymore. And that was a big one. I was like two hours a day or more. I was commuting and I was like, cool, let's take in all this information, taking all this stuff. I don't have that anymore. And then I'm just doing it myself as well. And so it makes it hard. So I love this spirit of just, let's connect, collaborate, and see where things go. We're intelligent, open-hearted people, and it's going to be interesting and amazing.
Absolutely. Right. For me, I lived in Los Angeles before, and so, and I was working far away from the house. So I had a lot of commute time, but also I used to be a tweaker. Right. So I had plenty of time. I had way more than 24 hours a day to listen to things. And then I had all these years like that I was awake, or whatever that means, before I ever started doing content. Right. So like for the first year or two I was doing content, I had all this stuff that I had listened to for the last 10 or 15 years and people I was interested in, and all that stuff to fall back on. And then like I was just basically doing that for the first couple of years, and then you realize, oh shit, like I don't listen to anywhere near as much stuff. I don't even know what's current. And the other thing is like, when you listen to someone for a really long time, when you're not thinking about interviewing them, like there's time to for that process of like, well, is this actually true? Does this actually matter? Is this actually that interesting in the long run? That has already happened. And the people that stuck with you after all those years of research, okay, you're going to go there first and do your interviews with them because you know a lot about them and it's stuck the test of time and whatever. But as you get into this thing where you're putting out content all the time and you have less time to listen and things are coming out faster and faster because more people are creating content, it's impossible to keep up with that. And then you find yourself going like, do I need a producer? But then that's a challenging thing, right? Like, because they have to sort of imagine things the way you would when they're deciding the whole thing is, it's a good problem to have, but it's challenging nonetheless.
Yeah, you just nailed all of it. And that's really interesting that we were both tweakers. I love that. We have more in common than we know, perhaps. I definitely, feel like this is the exact challenge that I have, but I love it because I'm also like, you know what? I'm just curious. I don't actually even care. What's your thing? What's your deal? What are you doing? Like, come on the show. Tell me about it. We don't have to agree on it. I'm not endorsing it automatically. And this is something that a lot of people maybe don't understand. If I have someone on my show and I'm chatting with them, I'm not saying that I absolutely like agree with everything or endorse everything they've ever said and done. By no means is that even possible. But a lot of people take it that way. They're like, you had so-and-so on, so you clearly are a, left-wing progressive, you're a right-wing, or you're a conservative, you're an anarchist, whatever. I'm like, you don't know what I am unless you ask me or listen to me telling you what I am. So when I'm having a conversation with someone, it's just that. It's a conversation. It's a meeting of minds. It's not that we instantly absolutely uphold every aspect of the other person's entire life work. Like, that'd be insane.
Right.
So I really This is just how I roll, you know?
Well, you just nailed that as well. So to the tweaker thing for a second, I actually think that like, you know, people, once they know that you are and have been one, they'll come and confess that to you. And it's very, very common in the awake community or in like the sort of metaphysical, synchromistic kind of thing. And I think that there's something to it in terms of there's other realities that exist at different frequencies and vibrations. And when you spend time in those areas based on whatever state of inebriation you're in, the fact that like, if I've never met you before, and we can share some weird experience we've had when we're on meth that like, we don't know each other, we don't know about each other, we're not hanging out in the same place or whatever, that place obviously exists. Yeah. That is there for anybody who can achieve that frequency or whatever to experience. And then you roll into that, like the US military and Hitler were all interested in that and used it. It's like, oh, they're gathering some sort of information. I don't know if we could call it intelligence or not, right? From these other realms. And, you know, I certainly did a lot of harm to myself, but I don't regret the time at all because I'm very, very well aware of the subtle differences in levels of reality that I think help in this discernment, you know, thing that we find ourselves in and like ever expanding amounts of knowledge and awareness. Right. So.
Yeah, those aspects of consciousness are all valuable. I totally agree. And like you said, you know, you do damage in some ways. And this is the same when people ask me, you know, like, do you think that people should use plant medicine to reach altered states and, you know, heal themselves or heal others or, you know, and I'm always like, well, yes and no, right? Like you should, if that's a level of consciousness you need to vibrate at in order to do what you're trying to accomplish. And if you go in with that intention, it's going to be good, true, and beautiful for you. If you, on the other hand, are just like, I don't know, I just kind of want, can we swear on this show?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to fuck myself up and just like roll around in the dirt for a while and let go of everything. That also might be healing for you in some way. It's going to lead you to something that you probably needed to experience in order to experience another thing or understand from another point of view. But it might be do more damage than good. There might be easier ways. There might be healthier ways. You know, so it really is about that intention that you come with. But it's totally true, like you said, that there are aspects of those experiences that helped us bring that into all these other things we're looking at in the whole world. Actually, you know, we just understand the human experience more deeply because ours is so well-rounded, if that's how you want to look at it.
Absolutely. And then there's the other thing of like this rejection of the quote unquote bad trip, right? Or whatnot, or like my experience with most drugs, but particularly with psychedelics, is they don't always give you the experience you want, but they'll give you the one that you need. And like, we don't always need like super like positive experience. Sometimes we need to be scared a little bit, right? And it might not feel like it when it's happening or even the next day, but a week, a month, or a year down the line, you could notice that that was like a shifting point in something for you, right? And so if you've made the decision to do it, whatever experience you have is actually perfect, right? Yeah. So for sure. All right. So, you know, I stumbled in on your show with Robert, who also is a podcast mate of mine and a good friend and whatnot. And I always try and pop in on some of his shows, not usually able to be there for the whole thing. So I came in on something that piqued my interest enough. And then basically I went back and just listened to that whole show. And that's sort of what I know about you. But a couple of things about your history. You didn't go too far into your own personal history, but you said a few things that really grabbed me. And one of them was about sort of your relationship with your father and what he kind of indoctrinated you with, you know, in terms of what was appropriate to think about how the world works and politics and whatnot from the time you were very young. And I have a similar situation with my father, not exactly the same, right? My father didn't go to Vietnam. He says he wasn't in the military, but I'm not sure that I believe that. Like, I think my family has some intelligence background and maybe some involvement in the military, like not like the battle kind of forces, but more like merchant Marines, like Navy weird stuff like that, right? So I don't know if I believe him or not, but definitely associated with what I think of as like international communism and like relations between Russia and the United States or China and the United States. So listening to what you said about your dad, it's like, okay, like here's a person like me that was indoctrinated with the left from the time they were younger, which is very, very different than at least 80 or 90% of the alternative information community. So could you like flesh some of that out for me a little bit about your dad and about your childhood and about the values you were sort of instilled with?
Yeah, I would love to. And I also love thinking and imagining some of the people listening to this are gonna be like, oh, so they're both connected to the military. So they're both in the Illuminati and dismissed. Like, I
Yeah.
love that. So hi, those people. Yeah, I my dad was in Vietnam, and he definitely did not choose to go to Vietnam. He actually was slightly troubled. He was adopted when he was younger, and so he was a Native American thrust into a very, very white town and situation and family. And he was made the it was so interesting. I've heard these stories about how he was made to fight other little boys in the alleyway, like for money. Like the parents would bet on it. I'm like,
Like
this
he was
is
a
such
pit
a
bull or something.
yeah, like such a fucked up, weird world, but it was like not looked at as abuse at all. It was just like, this is what people did. I'm like, man. So I just feel like his little soul in there going like, I don't want to fight anyone. Like I was made to fight when I was a kid. Then I was made to fight in Vietnam. And like, this is not what he wanted. He was a lover, you know, and he was a warrior, but he was a lover. And it's just really sad to see, but he had stolen a car and they caught him on joyriding. And so they were like, you can go to Vietnam or you can go to jail. And he was like, fuck, at least in Vietnam, I have some freedom, I guess. And so he went, and he was really, really an excellent sharpshooter. And so they put him in, you know, this sniper training or whatnot. And he became a sniper. And what's interesting is all his stories he told us later in his drunken rage of slow death. You know, he talked about being in Cambodia, and we weren't supposed to be in Cambodia. And he talked about being a sniper, and he talked about how many people he killed. And he talked about how he was so good at it, actually, that they somehow forced him into a second tour. You're supposed to be, you know, free after the first, but somehow they tricked him or trapped him or whatever happened. And so this like ate at him even more and gave him even more hatred and angst for this system and this government that would lie to him, lie to everyone else, put them in Cambodia. They're not supposed to be there, like force him into this sort of secretive program. And some people have, you know, looked into this story and said, you know, your dad was probably in this. I don't remember the name right now, but it's some sort of like almost black opsy sort of army regimen that went to Cambodia and pulled off all these, you know, secret assassinations and stuff. And I'm like, I wouldn't doubt it. He was really conflicted about the damage they did and how, you know, not on the up and up it was, and he wasn't okay with that. So he just received and went through all of this trauma like you couldn't even imagine. Like I couldn't even imagine, at least. I look at Apocalypse Now and I'm like, you know, maybe it was something like that, I don't know. And I know he also then did a lot of drugs in Vietnam. A lot of people did. There was really free to cheap heroin just everywhere. And you know, and so he became a drug addict as well. So when he came back, he was fully and thoroughly traumatized and damaged. And he knew the source of that damage was the government. And so, you know, it was also in that time where everyone's kind of waking up to some level, at least, as much as that may have been engineered, you know, to the abuses of government and of the military and of getting into wars when, you know, the Gulf of Tonkin like didn't even happen like that or whatever. You know, these false flags and these things were coming to light. And you know, so he saw all that too. And so when we were born, his primary motivation was to keep us from ever being, you know, made to fight and harm against our will, and to keep us really as free as possible, to keep us from anything that was against our will, and to know for sure that the government lies. So he taught us that over every chance he got. He told us those things like, your government is going to lie to you, period. You should still listen and find out what they're saying, but you should also look and see like, where is the lie, because it's there. There's no time where they're just going to be straightforward and honest. So you just are always going to question this. And it's interesting too, because it kind of like spilled over into education as well, where he told us, you know, you don't have to say the flag salute. This country's going to lie to you, and it's going to like start false wars and false flags and all of these things. Why would you salute your country and give it your allegiance? You know, but interestingly, my mother was more sort of like, you know, it's an okay country. We've done some good things too. Like you can you can like the flag, you can like your country, you can like these things. And so we had these sort of two different, which I don't even know if that could exist right now. We're in this time right now where it's so like, oh, you don't agree with me? Well, you should die. Like I hate you and fear you. I don't even know if two people could be married who have even slightly different views on, like, it's very, very divisive right now, and just super immature all the time, it seems like. But they had that, you know, and we were really lucky for it, because we got that, you know, maybe we question the government, maybe we don't trust these people, maybe we look at authority and we say, who are you to tell me this, and why would I just believe you automatically? And those are fantastic skills. Whether you end up then thinking the country's kind of cool, or it's kind of always shit, or all countries are shit. It doesn't matter where you end up, because at least you have this propensity to question any authority, not just because you're in blind rebellion, but because you're in a thoughtful place where you can evaluate, right? That's, I think, if anybody could just instill one thing in all children, that would be a great one to go for. So I felt very lucky. And, in school, I did choose to then not do the flag salute. And so did my sister, and my brother did not. And we were all supported in those choices, and we were able to just do that. So I also then, got this, like, it's okay for me to decide for myself what I want to do, and no one else gets to tell me. And I think that's also a powerful gift I was given, mostly by my father. And then finally, my mother also really encouraged us to just think and just ask questions. And, I always say, like, there's that, like, why, what about this, what about that? And some adults and parents are like, oh my God, shut up, like, just stop. But my mom was really like, yeah, why? I don't know, let's find out, like, what is the answer, let's see, like, I don't know. And here's a book, look in the book, see what you can find from there. And so I really got this also drive to ask questions, know that asking questions was actually good and encouraged and okay, and then also find the ways to seek the answers, because unlike many adults, my adults were willing to say, we don't know, I don't know, we might even be wrong. Like, we all need to find out together. And that also seems very uncommon. It seems like adults and authority figures in general are like, I know everything, that's all, ask me, I got it. It's not true. It's not true. So I just feel very lucky. I feel like I was instilled with all of the best sort of qualities to be able to think and question.
So, okay, so you said a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm going to try and go back and hit on all the things that I thought were important. And then there's also there's a lot of similarities to some of the things you said about your family, and then a few differences. And I think those actual small differences are quite interesting as well. But just back to Vietnam and Cambodia and whatnot. So I think you're talking about the Phoenix program.
Maybe. I thought it had something to do with a black horse, but I could be wrong.
Oh, okay. Okay. So there's a bunch of stuff, right? So there's Phoenix program. There are some smaller, more very black hidden kinds of projects that were going on sort of within and around that. Some of them even involving people who were very young, but also involving a fair number of people that were also Native American from stories I've heard. I'm just curious.
Interesting.
And this is probably I didn't expect to talk about this with you here today, but I don't know if you know who Duncan O'Finian is. Do you know who Duncan O'Finian is?
No.
All right, so he's a person who are mostly like research, like the MK Ultra and like Super Soldier, or like, like Child Assassin kind of track kind of thing, are very familiar, because he sort of broke open a new layer in the mid 2000s with the stories that he gave about his life, right? And some of them have been manipulated and used in ways that are not appropriate. And then there's questions about some of the other stuff, but he did open up a large space for a lot of people to begin talking about like experiences that they had that they're so difficult to comprehend that they're easy to keep hidden and buried. And so nobody talked about them until he started talking about his, and it just opened something new up. But anyway, one of the stories I remember him telling very, very early on was about something having to do with Vietnam and Cambodia, and literally like what sounded like bilocation or time travel in terms of using people in areas where they weren't supposed to be, but through metaphysical means as well. Right. And so if you were, I can't say, it was on this show at this day, but some of the stuff he was putting out, like in that 2009, 10, 11 range, in some of those conversations, there's stuff about that. And when you were talking about it, and Duncan is also Native American. Duncan is like Celtic and Native American. And so it would probably be similar types and genetics that they would do similar kinds of things with in that area. And then the other thing is, I'm curious, just because when your father says something like, I don't know how I got tricked into it, is he going like, shame on me for buying some bullshit? Or like, I don't actually remember what happened. Like, I have fog for that time.
I don't know for sure, because he's dead now. He died when I was 11. But I have a feeling it's I'm not sure what the hell happened. Like, that's all the time, because he was fucked up, like, and he would get trash drunk and just come home and just start telling us like the most random shit. And I don't remember most of it, because I just remember being like, damn, is this guy okay? Like, this doesn't seem okay. Like, he's not okay. So it was just traumatizing for me. But he would just share some shit that was pretty wild. And so I get the feeling that it's more like, I don't even know what the hell happened. I'm not even really sure.
So,
And
okay, so it's making me think of, and it's not that I wasn't aware of this before, but I wasn't aware of it in the context or the sequence that this made me aware of it. And again, like Netflix is dubious for information. There's a lot of propaganda there, but there's also some stuff that they feel like they can reveal some truths there because people like you and I think it's propaganda. So we won't go there and we won't like footnote it that we got that right, even though I'm doing
right.
it now. So I recently watched this documentary there that's a couple of years old called Wormwood, right? And it's about Frank Olson, who he's well known for having been like one of the early deaths in the MK Ultra, Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird kind of programs. And he fell out of a window in New York, and you know he had been involved with LSD experiments and all that kind of stuff. But that was like, so I knew about that. I was very familiar with that story. But there's layers that were gone, and there was plenty of propaganda in the series, right? But there was a layer that I wasn't aware of to this story, and that is that it wasn't about that they were afraid he was going to blow the whistle on MK Ultra, which is why this happened. That became the cover story. There was like a cover story for another cover story, and then underneath some truth. Yeah. He was like worked in biologics, right? And so biological warfare. And he, way back in the 50s and 60s or whatever, I can't remember exactly the years was happening, became bothered by the way his work was being used in Korea. And like, I guess maybe later, I mean, he may have died before Vietnam, but you know, like in that kind of thing, in the theater of the Asian wars, right? And I think what happened when they dosed him with LSD, they really realized what a loose cannon he was on that topic, and they needed to get rid of him because they didn't want anyone to know about biological warfare. Now, we obviously know about Agent Orange, but that's chemical in a lot of ways. Like that was a chemical warfare. Yeah. And what this seemed to be was more pathogenic, like maybe closer to maybe what we might be dealing with now. Yeah. Right. Kind of thing. And so there was this other layer to it that I didn't understand that all came together in this one person. Right. And we think about like, and this part, my brain is just making up right now, but we've heard like from a few people that like, to whatever extent this current thing is a thing, people who've experienced it really bad have experienced hallucinations and like all kinds of stuff along with this, right? And so nobody thinks of that being a part of biological warfare as well, that it could be used in the same way that like psychedelics or chemicals or drugs or whatever is used to create conditions in the body. Think about all the health problems that people came back with. And we understand when someone's exposed to chemicals, what the long-term damage is, but some of these different kinds of viruses and bacteria and stuff like that can do all kinds of crazy shit to your body as well, and screw up your cognition and your consciousness and all. So I'm not saying that that's what it is, but since he was in that theater that this was sort of being spoken about here, and if they're going to conduct this kind of crap on the general public, they're sure as hell going to experiment it on the military first. They have to take everything. Right. So these things were just kind of coming when you were describing it, and his sort of inability to quite recall. And obviously there was acknowledged drug use, but a person who's drug user knows what their tendencies are when they're on drugs, that what things, right? Yep. And if there's something that is beyond that, right? Like we all know you did drugs, I did drugs. I have these behaviors that I do when I'm on drugs, and I never do them when I'm not on drugs. But if someone said you were doing this, I'd be like, I don't, that's not what I do. I do this other stuff that's even more embarrassing than that maybe, but I don't do that. I've never done that. And so if there was something occurring outside of his usual, sort of range of weird behaviors one does, in an altered condition, then that's kind of fascinating, right? And if he can't quite remember what that was, but wasn't willing to say, like, I don't know, I was blackout drunk, right? Yeah. Because he's willing to say that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really so fascinating to think about. And the genetic component too is so interesting to me, because that Native American component is so strong in him. And then we have that as well. And then I've also had, after he died, and maybe before, actually, there's some evidence that some people in my family also experienced before he died, what you would call like UFO and alien encounters and abduction. phenomenon. And that is often also associated with people in the military. But I just remember thinking like, how would some random grunt, which he was, I mean, he was a sniper, so he had some sort of like status, I guess. I don't know how these things work, but he doesn't seem like he was that special. He wasn't a general, an admiral, whatever. How does he get tied into and roped into some sort of alien phenomena, an alien abduction thing, when he didn't want to be there in the first place? He definitely didn't agree to anything, and then left as quickly as he could. That doesn't seem necessarily like what people are talking about when they're talking about the connections to, my lab's military abductions and the military in general in connection with UFOs. But what you're describing starts to make more sense to me. Like if this is an experiment, if there's bilocation, time travel, or interdimensional sort of puncturing going on via these people, then that would seem to just automatically almost invite entity attachment or, UFO alien attachment and activity, just because of the nature of what's going on. Like, I think those are interdimensional beings. Right. And so maybe that's how it sort of got attached to him and then therefore to us as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's all the kinds of things. And when you get into the talk about genetics, you can also get into the talk then about, and this relates to biological warfare as well, immune systems. And immune systems, like how well or with what tools your immune system functions is highly determinant in your ability to recognize patterns. So pattern recognition. And so that plays into all that you were just saying right there, which is part of why they don't ever tell people exercise, vitamin D, vitamin C, They don't, it's not so much that sure, the pharmaceutical companies want your body to be degraded so that you'll buy their shit. But in terms of like the larger psychological operation, the weaker your immune system is, the less likely you are to recognize that, hey, there's a pattern to all of this, right? And so, and that would also go into someone being a sniper. You have a certain sort of set of genetics, and part of pattern recognition is how early you pick up on something, right? And a lot of Native Americans are really good at like tracking, or like, they get the hair rising first when there's like an animal in the area or whatever. So that would probably be part of how he ended up there, would be my guess, in that position. But then also how manipulated Native American people, like Asians, also tend to get like drunk or high or whatever faster. And so like they tune in quicker and they tune out quicker, right? Yeah. So it's like the most manipulatable position, right? Yeah. So that's super interesting. And then something else you just said, there was something else you said that I wanted to respond to. It went for a second, so I'm just going to kind of carry on to some of the next part. So what's interesting to me about like your dad, it was always like, don't trust the government. It was not, don't trust the Republicans. It was, don't trust the government. So, okay. So with my family, also very questioning of a lot of things, but seemingly with the slant of like, really, you just can't trust the right, like the left, like they might not be honest with you. At least my dad's part of the family. Like my mom, some sort of like a very centrist, voted Democrat sometimes Republican and whatever, but was more conservative than my dad. So I got some of that as well in terms of like the balance of not completely to one side or the other. But I was raised mostly by my father. So I was raised in that, like, while the left does some criminal things, they're right about the reasons why they're doing it. So it's kind of okay. And the right is always wrong kind of stuff. Right. So that's interesting that like, it was kind of an all along, don't trust the government, period. And what you said about like not standing for the flag salute or whatever, or for the national anthem, I didn't do that either, but it was never I don't think I ever had a conversation with my family or whatever about it. It was just like, I don't want to, right? Well, I don't even like the song is too long and I'm bored halfway through. So I'm going to sit down and daydream or whatever on whatever else I was doing. But anyway, I think that was sort of interesting, kind of what you laid out about your father. So he wasn't necessarily a left winger. Like, I guess I had thought that like he was of the left from the conversation I heard.
No,
you went into.
No, my mother was definitely more towards the left. And so I did get that, Republicans are bad. Don't trust Republicans more than you don't trust Democrats. But, like exactly like you said, at least the Democrats are like trying to help us out, the little guy and whatever. And so we can at least vote for them. And, I wonder, I would love to go back in time and find out, but I would guess that my dad didn't even vote. But my mom definitely did for Democrats. And so when he died, then it became much more, we're Democrats, we're leftists, we're progressive, and we're, this and that. And so I did get more of that. And I was in alignment. I identified as that for a while, which is how I became a radical revolutionary communist for a time.
So we're going to go there in just a second because I found that interesting as well. But just the last thing I want to hit on what you said is I think that I heard you say either in that or some other little segment I did tune into in your live streams the other day, just as I was sort of catching up with you for this, that maybe, did you say that you had Lyme disease?
I don't know if it's Lyme disease. Someone on my show recently told me through her what she calls quantum benevolent technology reading that I have Lyme disease, and I'm not surprised because my newest understanding of all of this, AIDS, cancer, any kind of immune system disorder, Lyme disease, and all these things are really one thing, which is human papillomavirus. And there's a million different types, but they all have the same sort of goal in the end, which is to infect every system in your body and hide in every system in your body. And therefore, the effects of it are so wide ranging that we have things from cold sores to, again, cancer or and so when she said Lyme disease, I'm like, yeah, probably. I mean, I call it all the same thing now. I feel like AIDS, HIV, and cancers, and all of these are immune system compromising things. And I think with the current issue we're dealing with is attempting to get that even deeper into more and more people, because it's this long, drawn out, stretched out process where, I mean, sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it goes to cancer and then you die. Sometimes your immune system fails so miserably you die. But for most people, it's like, starts like this, and then it goes this, and then 10, 20, 30 years down the lane, now you're in what they might call Lyme's disease, and, you know, full systems, all systems failing and having various sort of reactions. And so it's possible. What I know I've been diagnosed with medically is Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disease that centers on and attacks the thyroid. And then what I've come to after that, I've actually been on this long journey of discovering what's wrong with me. And, you know, whether we go with terrain theory or germ theory, I honestly don't care. You can call it whatever you want. It's the same to your body. There's something happening, right? And so we want to heal it as we can. And so a lot of people don't like this guy because he is a germ theory person. And I really don't care. I don't attach to the words. I don't care about the labels, right? But he seems to be correct in many things. And he's the medical medium. Everyone knows him but me. I just am recent. I just found him recently. So sorry. But that guy, he talks about, you know, how you have this progression. And he described my progression to me. He was like, when you were young, you probably got you know, what they call scarlet fever or mono or one of these things, which are all just HPV. It infected you. Your system went insane because it recognized it as this invader, and it tried to get rid of it. And that's why you were so sick. And I did. I got scarlet fever, and I remember very clearly I was so sick. My mom, we didn't have insurance, and she was like, I don't know, we might need to take her to the hospital. We can't afford it. Like, she might die. That sick that I was scared about it. And then it passed. But after that, and ever since then, I had rashes and little welts and little like bumps that would, you know, and they were all from all different reasons. Sometimes because it was too hot, sometimes because it was too cold, sometimes because of a laundry detergent was the wrong type for me, and sometimes because of the soap I used, and sometimes because of what I ate. And so there was never a pattern we could find of like, what is causing these reactions. We went to the doctor, and it was the first time I ever heard the words autoimmune. You have an autoimmune issue going on. We don't know exactly what it is, so there's no way to treat it. And, you know, anything can cause a reaction in your body, and that's just how life's going to be. It was like, oh, I mean, that sucks because it's really disruptive, actually. And like, there must be a cure for this, but no, apparently there's not. You know, and I had different lymph things, and I had like my lymph nodes would swell up randomly, and everyone just said, oh, you're just sensitive. You're just really sensitive to so many things. Like, okay. But I didn't have it before I had scarlet fever. Didn't have anything like that. So then I had that. Then eventually, you know, he talks about how at some point in your life, you probably had a really stressful occurrence, a really traumatic occurrence. And then you'll have this flare up, what they call flare up. And it might be that at that point, a doctor told you, you have actually rheumatoid arthritis or one of these other things that are autoimmune, you know, labels. And that did happen. I had this really stressful, traumatic occurrence where this man abducted me and dragged me down the street, and I barely got away, and fucked me up for a while. Like, it was very scary. And that trauma, you know, within days of that, I had this huge, random, weird, all of my joints swelled up. My hips swelled up, my knees swelled up, and my ankles swelled up. So my joints from the waist down just swelled, and I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand, I couldn't get out of bed, and it was very painful. When I finally could get out of bed, I did go to the doctor, and I said, what the fuck was this? Like, that was crazy. And he was like, oh, it might be rheumatoid arthritis. So he's like, I'm reading this book. He's telling me the progression. I'm like, all of these things happen to me. And he's like, and eventually, if you're like unlucky enough or whatever it is, your body, the way it reacts, the way the HPV is coming and attacking you, whatever, eventually you're going to get diagnosed with this, like maybe Hashimoto's, maybe this. And these are like the advanced stages. And the stages after that are cancer. And the stage after that is death. So I was like, holy shit, I got that. I'm at the Hashimoto stage. Like, they finally diagnosed me. And, you know, and again, the way they treat that is basically to say, like, there's nothing we can do and you're just going to suffer and then die eventually. And you're like, well, this, come the fuck on. Like, there is nothing anyone can do to, you obviously don't even know what's wrong with me then, right? So this medical medium guy's telling me this whole story, and I'm like, this fits. Okay, so what does this guy say to do? He says to juice celery every day and do all these other things too, which are basically heavy metal detoxes. Essentially is what you're doing, is you're detoxing heavy metals. So again, whether you're a terrain theory person or germ theory person, you can still understand where this is all going and coming from, and you can still treat yourself. And so I started doing the celery juicing every day and the other juices and the, you know, spirulina. I brought spirulina and chlorella back and dulse flakes and all these things that are really good at sapping out the heavy metals and getting those out of your system. And I've had this dramatic improvement in my health. I have so much better than I've been in years. It's like I went back in time and I'm younger again. And so, you know, do I have Lyme's disease? Maybe, because to me, it really is. And I don't mean to diminish people who do have Lyme's and they're in much more chronic fatigue. They're in a more advanced state than what I've gotten to. I don't mean to do that at all. I just mean to say that actually there's hope. Wherever you're at in that spectrum, if you're on this spectrum, unfortunately, there actually is hope, and you can do this heavy metal detox. And whether you look at it as it's getting rid of the virus or you look at it as it's getting rid of the heavy metals, they're one and the same, and you're clearing yourself out and you can heal from all these things. So that was a really long answer to your question.
No, it's perfect. So real quickly before I kind of respond, just because like Laura was here in the background saying something, and actually like you're presenting what you just described. I'm a nutrition consultant and I do like intuitive nutrition consulting. I mean, I have I'm certified and stuff as well, but I don't know if that even matters, but I have a lot of clients that present with the exact same scenario and set of things that you said. And from my perspective, like the medical medium is sort of like 50-50. He's on, like, he's got some good ideas about things, and then I think goes too far in some areas and whatnot. So it's like what works for you, chew the meat, out the bone, all that kind of stuff. But because of what their background conditions are and what Laura's saying, because she's had a lot of the same issues as well, she wants me to ask you if you mean EBV instead of HPV. Do you mean EBV?
They're the same to me. So yeah, he says
Okay.
EBV, I say HPV.
Okay.
But they're all, no matter what you call them, they're all HPV actually. And he says the same thing. Epstein-Barr is still a type of human papillomavirus.
Okay, so she was every time she said HPV, she's like, she means EBV, right? So, okay, yes. Well, that's it. Like, so that I don't have either, right? But I've had a lot of clients that come and say that they've had EBV or something like that. Like, they don't have. I know people who've told me they have HPV, but I happen to watch this really. So I have two things to say, and I don't know which one to say first. Let's go with the HPV part first, and then we'll go back to the Lyme disease and why I asked you the question that I did. I watched this like documentary one time about like this man who was like turning into a tree. Have you ever seen that?
I have, yeah.
And that's HPV, right? And if you think about what's going on with all of the strange things that are conditions that are popping up and theories and ideas about what the elite want to do with us and whatever, like, everyone's worried about us becoming half robot, but there also seems to be some strange thing where it's like, are they trying to turn us into plants or something like that? Right. And I watched this documentary about this guy, and it literally, he looks like he is turning into a tree. Right. Yeah. And so this idea that they would want HPV, as you say, to infect every cell and begin taking over the system. If you were trying to transition, like, let's say we have like, okay, we're like animals, right? And then you have plants. Then you have some very strange things like mushrooms or fungus that are like weirdly a little bit more like animals than they are like plants, even though we think of them more as plants. And if they're like us, if they're kind of like Paul Stamets will say that like we're actually quite akin to mushrooms. Like, okay, is there some sort of fusion process going on here? And that HPV is like one of the things that's creating that sort of activity. And then you go into like further woo with someone like Clifford Carnicom's research on like cross-domain bacteria, where it's like part from like the human biology and part from archaea and whatnot. And then you're sitting around the same thing again. Right. So that, and then with the Lyme disease, and again, I'm applying some of my sort of intuitive skills. I don't know why my brain wants to do this, but as soon as you started to say, as soon as I asked you, you would also swing out UFO experiences or whatever. For some reason, it feels like if you have Lyme's disease, that's what's related to the UFO experiences. And if you think about it, where people often get Lyme disease is from a tick bite, and you get ticks when you're off in the woods, which is also where most people report their alien and UFO things. So I'm wondering if when somebody first gets the tick, most people don't even know when it first happens. They discover it later when they go home and take a shower, and their mom is like, oh, I have to pluck that out and whatever the toxin that is released in the body at the moment of first whatever, is that kind of similar to when you're taking mushrooms or acid and you have some sort of, contact or communication with some other thing that you think, but what it really is just like something different firing in your brain and in your body based on your neurochemical situation at that moment. Right. Yeah. So I don't know why, but that was just what the story my insides wanted to make up about like what you said. Right.
Well, it is that you are taking in the consciousness of whatever it is, right? And when you, like you said, when you eat mushrooms, you're taking in that consciousness and now you're merging with it. That's why it's this totally expansive experience where you go beyond your own normal consciousness. And it's the same with anything, right? I think about even when we're eating a plant or an animal or whatever, we're taking in part of their consciousness. And those are so maybe common, standard, or often repeated that maybe it just doesn't affect us so differently, or we're just very used to it maybe, but yeah, when a tick bites you, is it then introducing this new consciousness into you? And is that part of what the disease is then? Is this consciousness trying to sort of take over yours? Parasites are the same, right? If we have parasites, they're literally starting to control your behavior, how you do things and why you do them, and the urges that you have. I mean, that's an intense level of consciousness invasion there, right? And so when I think about that, I have a little story I can share about Epstein-Barr virus and my encounter with it on the astral sort of level.
Yes, please.
So and this was right in that time period where I had found the medical medium, and I'm totally with you. Like you said, there's some things that he's like, I don't necessarily connect to, but I just like received all this like affirmation that this is what it is. This is what's happening to me. And here's some of the ways I can heal it. And I was in a meditative space, and I do a lot of like ceremonial and meditative and astral and like different things. And so I'm used to that stuff. So this was an accident. I didn't go intending to meet Epstein-Barr, but I was in a meditation I just normally do. And I was going to where I just call it my death tent. It's the tent where I really make friends with my death and like accept that I am not really this body, right? And some other things go on there too. And so I'm at my death tent, but something standing on top of my death tent, and there has never been anything standing on top of my death tent before. And I literally just had this encounter where I just found out that medical medium like thinks it's EBV and all of this. So it's just new in my consciousness. And I look up and I see this thing, and I'm like, what are you? Who are you? And what are you doing here? And it's like, and it's telling me, I realize that it's Epstein-Barr virus. And I'm like, you motherfucker. I'm like, what? I'm gonna kill you. Like I start getting angry and like I'm gonna like how dare you like invade my body like this? You've done this to me. Like I'm really angry, which is taking me out of meditative space. But on the way out, and it was telling me like, no, I'm actually gonna kill you. But it wasn't very like aggressive about it either. And I was like, well, that's fucked up. And as I'm like kind of being taken out of meditative space because I'm like too attached and too angry, I'm no longer meditative. I just understand that it has this sort of like sadness and like this failure, like it had its head in its hands and it's like, I've failed, and I was thinking like, yeah, you did. Yeah, you failed. I'm killing you. Like you're going down. But as I left and I was coming out of meditative space, I'm like, man, I wish I could have like been less attached to that and spent more time there in communication with this being or whatever. I was asking myself, like, why was it sad? Like, what did it fail at? I took it as it failed because I'm going to kill it and wash it out of my body or whatever. But that wasn't it. And I just knew it wasn't it. And I was trying to think, what could the failure be then? And then I kind of realized like it wasn't aggressive at all. And actually it almost felt like it was sorry for me or apologetic even. And that's different than what I would expect for something that's like invading you, trying to take over, trying to get in every spot it can. Like that's a different energy. So what is this? And I had this thought, like, I wonder actually if it never meant to be so imbalanced and it never meant to be the thing that was killing me or whatever is going on. And then I felt kind of bad for it. And then I'm like, well, what went wrong? And like it was the next day or soon after that, I was reading again in the medical medium book, and he said, actually this Epstein-Barr, whatever it is something that was in our system that we needed. It's actually supposed to be in balance with us. And we actually made the choice to, maybe consciously, unconsciously, whatever, fucking flood ourselves with chemicals and metals, heavy metals and all this shit. And that's actually what it eats. So in a normal relationship with it, it would just be there and it would just be eating some of the shit that we don't need. And that's cool. We're in symbiosis. But we went overboard and we were like poisoning ourselves, and it has to eat all this shit. Now we're like making it almost like how we make bacteria that are supposedly like very supercharged because we've get them antibiotics and then they overcome it and now they're like better than they were before and stronger and they're too powerful. It's kind of that same process. And then I just felt so much compassion. I was like, well, it's not its fault even that this is happening to me. It's my fault. It's all of our fault as humanity that we have gone. It's such into imbalance in our relationship with food, especially, and water and air, and really poisoned ourselves. And so at that level, this consciousness is within us. It's within me, right? And but it's out of balance, and it doesn't want to be, and I don't want to be. And so those choices that we can make that can bring it back into balance are stop poisoning ourselves with all these heavy metals and other things, and also start to reduce the amount that's already in your body. And now I don't have to kill it, and it doesn't have to kill me. We just can live in harmony. And I don't know that every consciousness is like that. There's probably some that do invade us that we don't want to live in harmony with and we actually want to get rid of, but this isn't one of them.
So that's pretty interesting. What you said, I did a show about EBV a couple of years ago with my friend, Dr. Caseberry, and she uses a lot of like muscle testing. She's actually a chiropractor that does nutrition response testing and muscle testing. And she's got a pretty good amount of like psychic and intuitive activity going on. And it's one of those things that's like, I feel the same way about her that I feel about my friend Chris Kaler, who's an energy healer, where it's like their healings actually work. The language that they use can be problematic for me. So I just pretend they're not saying the words they're saying, because I have an idea that is like similar but different. So I just kind of roll with it, but she does a lot of stuff with EBV. And I can't remember if we talked about it during the show or if it was something that I researched before the show or after, where I got the idea in my head to research EBV as like an alien invasion, like, right, kind of thing. And actually, remember when we were doing this, we went down a path that is, I wouldn't say 100% in alignment with what you just stated, but about 50% in alignment, where that actually, yes, this is something that is a consciousness that is not us, that is here with us, and in some cases inside of us, that something else, whether that be our poor choices or a group of people who've become aware of how it operates, is using to invade. And so like, and this goes for, I would say this with like parasites as well, right? That like everybody's looking into the sky for like the Greys or some other aliens to like come. That is not how it happens. It is a cellular or in the body kind of invasion, or for people who are worried that like the Chinese military is going to show up here and invade the United States. Like they already did it through Walmart with plastic crap like 30 years ago, right? You have to like expand your thinking about these things. But what you said was very similar. We ended up finding like a couple of like somewhat scholarly like papers about what you just kind of said.
Oh, wow.
Right. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing you were saying about this situation with the heavy metals in the body, right? Parasites eat heavy metals. And there's all this, the main thing that we're out of balance with lots of stuff, but particularly water. We dump all sorts of shit in the water that ends up in the fields and the food we grow and all this kind of stuff. And so that is exactly it, right? Like the heavy metal detox from the body, a parasite cleanse, a candida cleanse kind of diet for whatever's going on really solves a lot of stuff, right? And a lot of people, when they present with like health problems that feel overwhelming, they're like, I'm too tired to do any of that. They don't want to stop eating the things that are making them sick, because that's actually the consciousness of the parasite, of the fungus, because fungus and yeast have consciousness as well, right? That are like, that they're talking because they don't want you to stop feeding them. And then the other thing is a lot of people will go on like a parasite or a fungus cleanse or something, and then suddenly they have a new set of symptoms because those things eat heavy metals. And once they're not eating your heavy metals, then you're having all that heavy metal inside of you, right? And so celery juice, even if it's for like a lot of times people come to me having had some success, but then some problem created by a medical medium diet will come. And I'll be like, yeah, we're not doing the medical medium thing anymore, but then be surprised when I say, but we're still going to drink some celery juice, right? Because of the fact that even if it's just on a temporary basis or a lot less, that a lot of people right now, the heavy metals are like a serious thing. And it's like, you're not done doing it, right? You can take breaks from heavy metal cleanse or do it in cycles or whatever. But until somebody finds some hidden environment, over the ice wall that we are all not aware of yet, like it's a constant influx. And so there has to be that going on. So what's happening inside of our body is so many of the things people think of as like external interference, like whether that be alien abduction, gang stalking, electronic harassment, or whatever, really, like if there wasn't metals or some of these other consciousness inside their body, would be little to none.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'm totally in connection with that, because that, when I do a lot of healing work and ceremonial work with people, and trying to help them cleanse from all sorts of things. And I always say, I think 90% of the people who come to me think that they've got like a demonic attachment or a, outside entity interference going on. And when I go into this space and do this work, 90% of the time, there's not anything like that. But there is stuff inside of us and things that we're doing and we're choosing, or we disconnected from and forgot that we need to reintegrate, or all sorts of things like that. Like you said, it really is coming from inside. And then, that idea that these chemicals or these metals that we're ingesting, maybe intentionally put out there for this exact purpose, are actually the thing that's holding the vibration or the energy or the access point or the portal or whatever you want to think of that is, that's allowing something else outside of you to interfere with you, is also, the flip side of that. Either way, though, I look at those things as really empowering, because then it puts it back in our core. Like we have the choice if we want, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, it is ongoing. We don't have this environment that's ever going to be pure from that. I shouldn't say ever. Right now, it's definitely.
I believe that there are pockets that exist where you can experience that, right? And it's up to us to make those the more dominant space, as opposed to these little tiny pockets, right? Like, yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about with you before we round out the public hour here is, you did mention that you were at one time a revolutionary communist, right? And there's not too many people in the alternative space willing to admit that, right? Or if they are, they're usually now an extreme right-wing conservative who's done the full pendulum swing and is profiting off of that, right? I wouldn't say I was ever a revolutionary communist, but I definitely, I don't think I ever identified as a socialist or as a communist, but I definitely was seduced by some of those ideas, and was definitely super anti-gun for a long time, and super I didn't call it universal basic income at the time, but I had this idea that everybody should have a place to live, enough to eat, and health insurance and whatever. I didn't call it the things they call it now. And I know how I got to believing those things and how I got out of believing those things. And I didn't, when I came out of them, when I kind of broke out of my left-wing malaise, right, which was about 3 weeks after Barack Obama's inauguration, I spent about 3 months sort of exploring libertarianism or Ron Paul kind of stuff, but I never really did that. I never voted for Republicans or libertarians. I had a pretty quick trip from pretty far left to voluntarist or sort of anarchist, which is where I still sit, but I'm not affixed in my what that means to me. It's evolved over time. I just know that the system is bullshit and I'm not really interested. But I don't have per se problems with people, whatever their perspective is, from within or without that. Can you tell me a little bit about how you ended up a revolutionary communist? And then it seems like you're not that anymore, and you've had many stops on the way out as well. So if you can kind of track that a little bit for us, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, we're very similar actually in a lot of that. I went full in, which I tend to do. I'm like, oh, this thing, run into it. Who cares what it is? And so I did get seduced in by that same sort of, I think what all of us do, it's a compassion, and it's a beautiful aspect of ourselves. And we want to keep that part. Don't throw that out. But it gets used, and it especially gets used, I think, when you're emotionally broken, which again, most of us are in various stages of emotional brokenness, but especially when you're still deep in that emotional brokenness, and you're lacking in self-responsibility and really heavy in the victim side of it, right? The victim mentality. And so those things are our sort of weak points that get used against us. And again, this is on purpose. It's intentional. It's just like any cult feeds on those types of energy. So if you're not strong enough in yourself to be emotionally well and cognizant, and therefore use logic instead of emotion to guide you, then you can be manipulated into these things, and especially preying on those aspects of you that are like the most human, beautiful parts of you, like compassion. So I also grew up very, very poor. We were homeless sometimes. We didn't always have food, and those things are hard too, and they're their own traumas. And so it was easy for me to say like, well, that wasn't fair, and we should have had food, and we should have had clothes, and we should have had a place to live all the time, and all these things. And that's true, but I was barking up the wrong tree. Like who was really responsible for keeping me fed, clothed, healthy, safe? And it was my parents, right? It wasn't anybody else's responsibility for that. So there's a bit of codependency that comes into this too, where you're not willing to really look at the shadow side of the people you love the most, because your job, you think, is to hide that from everybody, and everybody's okay over here. We're all going to protect each other and never have to grow. So there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of emotional trauma that's caught up in it. And then again, a lot of our what you might want to call our human nature, that is just our genuine desire for everyone to be, we want everyone to be happy. Why can't everyone just be happy and be taken care of and be well and loved and whatever? So all of that kind of led into it. But I was definitely, seduced into then thinking like, yeah, it's all the rich people's fault. They're hoarding all the money. They took it all from us. We're the workers. We deserve more. We can't even barely get by because they won't let us. And some of that might have some truth to it, but the answer is definitely not to just run around killing anybody with money and burning down cities and burning down whatever. At least now I don't think so. At the time, I really believed there's only one answer to this. There's only one solution. If the rich people have created all the world governments, done all of this to everyone, like controlled history and controlled us and pitted us against each other and whatever, then we just need to rise up and rip them down. And so my sister actually was deeper into it than I was, and she was a revolutionary communist, and she had literally joined up, the Revolutionary Communist Party of the United States of America. And so I never joined officially. I wasn't like an official, but I was around a lot, and I was basically essentially like, in it. It just wasn't official. And so I followed her kind of into that. And there was a lot of good that came of that. Like I learned how to organize and community organize, and how to spot a Fed anywhere, and how to spot the agitators and the instigators that infiltrate every movement. And those are all really valuable skills, talk to people, get up on a stage and speak, and all of these things I actually do, find value in still. But there were definitely times where we'd be like running down the street, and I'd be like, wait, what are we supposedly accomplishing right now? Like, why are we actually doing this right here, right now? Like, I get the whole big themes and big schemes of this whole of the philosophy, but also like this moment, like why this here? Like, what is this leading towards? And I always, right, I have been a question asker, and I question authority, and I think a lot. And so I did ask questions, and I started to be forced to notice that my questions weren't really answered. I'd ask like, well, what are the actual steps we're going to take here to like dismantle the United States government specifically? Oh no, you just need to read the book and do the thing, go to the meeting and like whatever. I'm like, that's not an answer though. Like, what is your actual plan? And there wasn't one. And then finally, what broke me of it, after a lot of unanswered questions, and especially the questions that are circular logic, that just say, go back to the books, go back to we're going to read the thing, and go.
Like religion?
Yeah, kind of like religion.
How do you know Jesus exists? Because the Bible says so.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So the final one though was when I found out, I understood, because I'd had it in my head. I knew that like religion was obviously like the opiate of the masses, right? It had done so much destruction. It's a cult. It leads people in and preys on them. Like, oh, this is nothing like, the Communist Party, right? Sure. But all those things I kind of was down with, and I understood like established religion as an institution is not good for people. It hasn't been for a long time. And so ripping that down and saying you can't do that anymore, like teaching people to liberate themselves from that, like that's beautiful. But I did not at any point think that meant that I couldn't be spiritual. I had always been deeply spiritual, deeply connected to my soul, understanding that there's God, there's heaven, there's whatever you want to call it, I don't care. But that level of being exists, and it's very real to me and very intimate in my life. And when I found out that no, in a communist, in the glorious communist revolution and future, you don't get to be spiritual. You don't get to be spiritual. I was like, wait, what? What are you going to do to people who just say, I have a soul? They're like, oh, re-education.
Yeah.
Like, you're fucking telling me that you're going to put anybody who thinks that and believes in their soul or anything beyond the physical material reality, you're going to put them in a camp? Like, yeah, that's like the literal plan and goal. I was like, oh, well, bye. Like, we're never talking again. This is insane. You're insane. There's a difference between the institutionalized, I'm losing my words, but the institutionalized unit that then goes in and infiltrates a society and starts to corrupt people, and exactly like the Revolutionary Communist Party actually is doing, this cult mentality and just people's connection to their own nature, their own soul, and their own place in the universe. And it's not, and to be able to go beyond materialism is essential, I think. But there's a reason why the communist revolution has removed that portion, and it's because the Communist Party is then now your God and your religion and your source of that same feeling and need that we have to feel connected and to honor our connection that goes beyond and transcends the material. So you can't have that, because it did exactly what it did for me. It frees you from this logical fallacy, closed circle loop that you're stuck in. And it allows you to then go back and rethink and re-question things. So I'm really grateful for my soul to have freed me from this trap. And, that really was it for me. That's what got me out and got me questioning. And it took a while. I still stayed, along with a lot of the same tenets, like the workers are, the power of the world. We build everything. It's the rich people are sucking off of us. It took me a while to even go further and break myself of some of those things as well. But that was the start of it, at least.
So just since you have the experience with that, how, most people, what percentage of people who are involved in the Revolutionary Communist Party and related groups and movements do you think are genuine in that? And what portion do you think are either of their own accord acting to manipulate people that they want to get them to do what they want them to do, or being paid by government intelligence agency corporations or whatever? What would you say the breakdown is? Totally genuine, acting of their own accord, but not genuine, and then acting of someone else's accord and definitely not genuine?
I'd say, I almost want to say 1 out of 10 is a direct agent or plant or whatnot.
Okay. Yeah.
So looking back at the time, I didn't obviously even consider that. I literally didn't even consider it. I was like, oh, we know the plants and the agents and that they're over here. They look like this and act like this. But the leadership of that sort of unit, I don't remember what we're even was supposed to be called, our comrades in that area, I think was definitely, government agents who are meant to draw people into this and keep them entrapped in it. So the rest of them, I think, were genuine. I think they genuinely believe this is the best way, the right way, and this is what I'm doing. I thought you were going to ask what percentage of them are emotionally traumatized people who are stuck in their victim mentality.
Answer that one too. That's a great. Yeah.
And that's 100%.
100%. Yeah.
100% of people. I don't think you can be involved in this without being.
There's no organic communist. It's always a response to something missing inside.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So then the other question about this, or just something that occurred to me as you were talking, right? This idea of camps, right? People are terrified of this idea of internment camps or concentration camps, unless you're a communist, and it's this imaginary.
That's great.
but we all send our kids. Well, I don't have any kids, but I was sent as a kid to summer camp, and lots of people still do. And I don't know about you, but I had a bunch of really strange stuff happen to me at summer camp, and it's been actually a big part of the work Michael and I have done, Project Kids and whatnot, is strange things that go on at summer camps. So one wonders if we have some place that everyone is sent as a child and some place that they're threatened to be sent if they don't behave in adulthood, what the heck is actually the entire purpose of camps to begin with? And why are we so comfortable? It's okay, we have to send them there to try and block them from God, maybe. And then because it's the human's nature to reach outside of themselves for something spiritual, whether you call it God or not, it has to sit as a possible threat that if you go too far out of the bounds with those ideas, then it's waiting for you as well over here.
That's so interesting. And now I'm just wondering why we call any of it camps, because I love camping. being out in nature and being connected and being outside of your sort of established home and living in that situation, that's exciting for me. Like that's something I seek. A lot of people like will pay good money to go, camping. And then these are called camps, and they're almost exactly the opposite. We should maybe just call them prisons, because that's what they actually are, right? Imprisonment for your mind and your soul and your time. So that is really interesting to think about that. I never went to summer camp. I never had that experience. I actually was really jealous and always wanted to, but that was one of the things, like, we were poor enough to never be able to afford it or even consider it. My sister got to go because it was a school sponsored one that they did sort of for free. I never got to go, and I was very jealous of everybody who got to, but so I have no idea what it's like. I have no idea what that would be.
So last question as we round this up, when you exited the revolutionary communists, like what other steps what were the steps out, not in terms of like, how did I get free of this, but in terms of what other movements did you get caught up in that then, you realize, this is just kind of another or a different flavor of a similar kind of thing. And right up until like, we all like get into the truth movement and then realize, the truth movement's a mind control program as well. And we start to find a way of like, okay, like a lot of the things I've learned are true, but like to attach myself to the doctrine of all this, and I'll get into some of what we're going to talk about in the second hour, but what were kind of the various iterations of this you went through on the way out?
I think I actually just radically broke from all of it. Because there was the, not in our name and all of these things that were connected to like that anti-war time period. This was like 2003. So it was like the heyday of the anti-war.
But that was my time and that sort of stuff as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had all sorts of, we had the Infernal Noise Brigade and all of these different sort of, and all the different socialists and all of the various democratic organizations that were also anti-war. And so I kind of was connected with all of them. And I think when I left, I just kind of said like, I don't know how many of any of you are going to actually be the right way. There has to be like something else. Like, what is the philosophy that I can follow that will actually answer all the questions I had that weren't answered? Like, what are the actual steps you're taking? What is your actual final goal going to look like for regular people, day to day, moment to moment? And how do you get people to actually live in alignment with that? Like, you can't just go forcing people at gunpoint to stop believing in religion or whatever and to like rip their government down and do what you want. You can, but that's not going to lead to anything lasting, right? So what is it? So I kind of just stopped joining anything and just started thinking more and more and looking more and more. And this, really did deepen my my truth and conspiracy and whatever you want to call these sorts of areas that I had never not really been looking down, but it just deepened in a way because I just made it very personal. I discovered podcasts as we all did. And I discovered, just various philosophies and books and things that I loved. And I just realized like, I don't have to have a label on it. I can just continue to say like, well, so far it seems to me like at least this type of behavior will help, this type of behavior will hurt. And maybe eventually I'll land on some kind of an answer that's more systemic than that. But it just felt like I needed to really go within and find something deeper, that maybe wasn't even in a book at all, or wasn't in a movement at all, or a group at all. And that has turned out to be the best choice, actually. And I did end up, now I would call myself an anarchist for lack of any better word. Yeah. But I think anarchy really nails every aspect of all of the questions I had. How are you going to get there? What are you going to do? How are you going to invite other people to do it? How does it look? And how do you know you've achieved like your goals? And everything has an answer actually in anarchy. So I love that about it, but I still hate labels. But that's what's cool about anarchy. There is no group. When you have a group of anarchists, you can just know they haven't quite understood it correctly, maybe.
Well, or they're all a different kind of anarchist, right? Like, I agree with what you said there. And I often, when I'm meeting somebody for the first time and having that conversation about, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? I don't say anarchist because they've been mind controlled to think that that's like Molotov cocktails in the street, yes. Blah, blah, blah. So I say voluntarist because nobody knows what that is. And so then I can explain it to them without having them on edge of like, oh, you're like a radical or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to public hour right now, and we're going to move over to the patron segment where I think like some of what we've set up here in this first hour will bleed over into like, what do we do with where we're at right now? Because I think we're at a really important pivotal moment collectively and individually, and in the way those things connect. So before we go, why don't you tell people where they can find your work, all that kind of stuff?
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have this first hour with everybody out there listening. And the best way to find me is to just search for Rogue Ways on Rockfin on YouTube, and also rogueways.org is my site, which is the hub of everything. So if you go to rogueways.org, you can get my books, you can get my all my shows are linked to from there, my Telegram chat, my Subscribestar, my rogue.locals.com, which is the community that I am organizing outside of Facebook. At least it's still, has its own problems, but it's pretty good. at least we get to see everyone's posts and comments, and it's not censored. So I appreciate that. And I also, like I said, do tarot readings. I do spiritual healings. I work with people in their spiritual guidance, and I create and sell orgone and crystal and stone jewelry and all sorts of stuff. So rogueways.org is the best place to find all of that.
Cool. All right. Well, we will see you guys on the other side. If you'd like to join us there, you can go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia or emilymoyer.locals.com. We will see you on the other side.